chocolate biscuits, chocolate brownies, hot chocolate cake, chocolate mousse, and chocolate chip cookies. Who doesn't like chocolate? In this podcast, you'll learn the history of chocolate, how it's made, and also we'll have a blind chocolate tasting on the podcast. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig.
Hello and welcome to the podcast, especially if you're a new listener. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And together with nearly 50 years of teaching between us, Reza and I are going to help you improve your English and take it to the next level. How are you, Reza?
I'm feeling fine, Craig. I'm feeling good, but I'm restless. I'm dying to do this experimental tasting that you mentioned.
Well, you'll have to be patient because first we're going to look at some facts about chocolate and then I promise you that later I'll give you some chocolate to taste.
Oh, I can't wait.
Before we look at our main focus this episode of chocolate, we have a voice message from Carmen from Spain.
Hi Reza, hi Greg. I am Carmen from Spain. And firstly, thank you so much for your podcast. You have helped me a lot. Right now, I have been living in UK since 3 months ago. And when I arrived, I didn't understand anything. Right now, at least, I can understand the context and too many things. But I have to continue to improve my English and my pronunciation. Could you give me some advice to improve my pronunciation? Will be wonderful. And that's all. Thank you so much, guys. I had fun a lot with you. Bye, kisses.
Well, thank you very much, Carmen, for your message. I actually thought your pronunciation was very good. What did you think?
I thought it was really good, except for one important word, podcast. It sounded like you were thanking us for a postcard, una tarjeta postal. But no, be careful, Carmen, it's podcast.
And one other small thing, you said that you have been living in the UK since 3 months ago. Bit of confusion there, Carmen, with your time expressions. You can say, I have been living in the UK since December. So when you use since, use the point in the past. Since last week, since December, since 1926, for example. Or with the preposition for is the time that has passed. So another possibility is to say, I have been living in the UK for 3 months. Use ago with past simple. So to change that sentence to the past simple, I got here 3 months ago. I got to the UK 3 months ago. Be careful of those 3 time expressions, for, since, and ago. Reza, any other points?
Yes, I think, Carmen, at the end you said, I had fun a lot with you. And I understand what you mean, but it's the order of the words which isn't quite right. I think you should say, I had a lot of fun with you. So it's usually a lot of something. And a lot of fun, a lot of wine, a lot of music, a lot of books. Can be countable or uncountable. So in this case, you should say, I had a lot of fun with you.
Your question specifically was about pronunciation, and even though your pronunciation to my ears sounded very good, if you want to improve it a little, we do have a pronunciation course on the Conching Machine website, which is for sale. And if you want more information about that course for Spanish speakers specifically, go to store.mencioningles.net or go to the show notes for this episode, which you can find at inglespodcast.com/353. And Reza, we have a free resource that we can recommend to students that doesn't cost any money, don't we?
Yes, if you're interested in improving your pronunciation or just simply hearing different people pronounce words, because not all native speakers pronounce the same word the same way, if you go to youglish.com, I'll spell that for you, Youglish. I guess it's mixing the words you or YouTube and English, so youglish.com. And what you do is you just type in a word or phrase into the box, not too many words, short phrase. Click the accent you want to hear. You have a choice of accents. You've got American, Australian, and British. Pretty good selection. Yeah, I know there should be Irish as well, but there isn't. You can't have everything.
Not yet. I'm sure that's coming.
And the algorithm will play you short examples from YouTube videos. That's why it's called Youglish, where you hear the word used at least once and maybe more than once. So it's really cool. And you listen to one extract, then you've heard the word, click to go to the next one and the next one, and there'll be multiple examples. And just because you've selected one accent, let's say American, it doesn't mean they're all going to say the word the same way, because in America there are different accents, in the UK there are different accents, and although I'm not an expert, I bet in Australia there are different accents as well. So you hear slight variations, all of native speakers of saying the same word.
Yeah, it's fun to play with it, and definitely recommended if you prefer not to pay to improve your pronunciation. But if you want a paid course, again, go to store.mansioningles.net. Next, we have a message from Sonia from Barcelona, who is living in Berlin. We've heard from Sonia before, and here she is again with an idea for today's podcast.
Hello, Reza. Hello, Craig. I'm Sonia. I'm from Barcelona, but I'm currently living in Berlin. I've been listening to you for 4 months right now, I think, more or less. And I'm improving, I think, a lot with my listening skills, my vocabulary, my pronunciation. And yeah, thank you for your work. It's a pleasure always to listen to you. And I want to propose a subject for your podcast that maybe you can talk about cocoa beans, because as we know, you both love chocolate, and me too. And I want to ask you if you can do a little bit of research on cocoa beans, because I know there are many different kinds of cocoa beans, but I don't know actually exactly the names and the different tastes and all of that. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sonia, for your message, and thank you very much for remembering the preposition to after listen, which many listeners do forget to include. So listen to a podcast. You said it's a pleasure always to listen to you, but I would put that adverb of frequency always before pleasure. So it's always a pleasure to listen to you.
Yes, Sonia, it was a pleasure to listen to your message as well, can I just say. And you're mentioning a theme very close to both our hearts, especially Craig. Chocolate is something which is always going to catch his attention.
Is it? I don't think I've ever mentioned before that I like chocolate, have I?
No, possibly. And your message was very, very clear. But let's get it right from the start. You could slightly improve your pronunciation of that word, chocolate. You kind of half pronounced the O in the middle, but you shouldn't. I mean, you didn't say chocolate, but you kind of said choco. But no, we usually don't pronounce that O in the middle. It's 2 syllables. It's chocolate. Also, understandably, people see the letters L-A-T-E and they think, oh, it's like the word late. Not early, late, chocolate. But it's not. It's lit. So, chocolate.
And if you want to check that, you can go to Youglish and hear lots of people pronouncing chocolate in in American English, in British English. So chocolate, usually 2 syllables. And we haven't collected information on the different types of cocoa beans and cocoa pods, although we have collected some information on the history, a brief history of chocolate, and also how it's made. So let's start with that. Reza, when were cacao plants first found?
Okay, so, well, first of all, let me clarify that cacao is a word in English, but we've got another word which we've been using up to now, which is cocoa. And as far as I know, they're interchangeable. Yeah, cacao, cocoa.
People don't really agree on when to use cacao and when to use cocoa. Some people who work in chocolate say that they name the cocoa plant, the cacao plant, the tree, the beans and the pods. Until they start processing it, they call it cacao. And after it's been processed, they call it cocoa. So,
And how do you spell these 2 words?
yeah, there's slightly different spelling. Cacao is C-A-C-A-O.
Just like Spanish.
Just like Spanish. And cocoa, C-O-C-O-A.
But the word you're going to hear much more in an everyday conversation is cocoa.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I grew up hearing. Cocoa, a cup of cocoa, or hot cocoa, or cocoa beans. But people who work in the profession often call the plant and the raw material cacao.
So the first cacao plants were found, we think, around 4,000 years ago, were what we call Mexico today, so Mesoamerica. So one of the earliest civilizations in Latin America were people called the Olmec, and they were the first, as far as we know, to turn the cacao plant into chocolate. And that was around 1500 BC. So we're talking about BC, before Christ, a long, long time ago.
So yeah, and that's 3,500 years. Wow.
And the Olmecs, they drank their chocolate during rituals, and they used it as a medicine. Did you notice that I said they drank the chocolate? So nothing about eating chocolate yet. Up to now, we're just talking about the drinking of chocolate.
And centuries later, a few hundred years later, it was the Mayans who used chocolate to worship their gods. So when they had religious ceremonies, worshipping their gods, they often drank cocoa. A Mayan chocolate was a mixture of the cacao seeds that were roasted and ground. Now, we've spoken about the word or the verb to grind before when we spoke about coffee, because when you have coffee beans, or in this case, cacao beans, you need to do a process that makes it into like a powder. And that process is called grinding. And the verb to grind is an irregular verb. So to grind, and the past participle ground, G-R-O-U-N-D. So they roasted with heat, they roasted the seeds, they ground cacao seeds, and they mixed that with chilies, water, and cornmeal. And cornmeal made the mixture quite thick. So not a runny liquid, but very thick.
What is cornmeal?
Is it maize?
Maize, yeah, maize. And cornmeal, it's like a kind of floury version of corn, right?
Yeah, and it's used to make things thicker, especially liquid, to make liquid thicker. Yeah.
So I guess they got corn and also somehow ground the corn to make it cornmeal and mix that in with the ground cacao seeds, right?
Exactly. And they poured this mixture from one pot or one container to another, and this created like a very thick, foamy liquid. Foamy is the adjective. And they called this liquid chocolatl. Did I say that right?
Who knows? Who knows? We'll never know. By the way, what do you mean by foamy, Craig? Foamy, you said? What's a foamy liquid?
Foamy, have you ever gone into a bath and you've put bubble bath in the water, and you get these bubbles? It's like a foam. Also when you're shaving, if you're a man and you're shaving, you use shaving foam. Some people use gel, but I use foam, and it creates this light, fluffy substance that you can put on your face to shave. That's shaving foam, so a foamy liquid.
This word you said, chocolatl, which is where we get the word chocolate from. What language does that come from?
It's from the Aztec language, Nahuatl. I think it's Nahuatl pronunciation. It means bitter water. Now, bitter is the opposite of sweet, B-I-T-T-E-R. Coffee can be sweet if you put sugar, or it can be bitter. And the mixture that the Aztecs obtained was bitter water.
That's really interesting. So chocolate, for many people these days, it's immediately associated with sweet things. It's a sweet thing. But the true origins of chocolate then are as a bitter substance. They even called it bitter water, right?
So, yeah, for most of chocolate's history, it was bitter. It was the Europeans that made it sweet.
So far, we've talked about the origins, but by the 15th century, the Aztecs actually used cocoa beans as currency. Currency means money, like euros, dollars, pounds. They used it as currency. And they believed that chocolate was a gift from the gods, and they drank it as an aphrodisiac, and even to prepare for war. So chocolate is good, it seems, for love and war.
Multi-purpose chocolate, isn't it? The explorer Hernan Cortés is believed to have brought chocolate to Spain in around 1528, and it was the Spanish who mixed this bitter chocolate drink with sweet things like sugar and honey to make it taste sweeter. And it was kind of like a Spanish secret for 100 years. They kind of kept it inside Spain, and the other Europeans didn't know about chocolate. In fact, there was a story that some chocolate was found by a British ship. Some cocoa beans were discovered by the British when the Spanish were bringing some to Spain, and they didn't know what it was, and they threw it into the sea because they didn't understand what the cocoa beans were. So it was kept in Spain pretty much for 100 years.
So the Spanish are to blame for your addiction, Craig. Yet again, the Spanish did it.
Yep, and that's why I'm living in Spain, because they were the first people to bring chocolate to Europe. Did you know that?
I didn't know that's why you've got, but it all makes sense now. It all makes sense.
What happened then after the Spanish had chocolate secretly in their country? It slowly spread to other European countries, but mainly among the rich people in society, the wealthy people in higher society, and in countries like Britain and France, they opened special chocolate houses where the rich could go and have this lovely chocolate drink.
The chocolate press was invented in 1828. Now, the word press is to put pressure on something. The press, this machine, it pressed. It can be a verb as well. It pressed. It squeezed. That'd be exprimir, yeah. Squeezed to put pressure to get all the goodness out of something. This press squeezed the cocoa butter. Butter is mantequilla, yeah, but cocoa butter isn't mantequilla, but it's a buttery substance. It has the consistency of butter, which comes from cocoa. So this press squeezed the cocoa butter from the roasted beans, and it produced cocoa powder. And this powder could be mixed with liquids and other ingredients and poured into a mold. A mold is where you pour something and then you leave it to become solid. We say it sets. Yeah, it takes that form and it stays in the shape of the mold where you've put it. And that's how they invented the manufacturing of bars of chocolate. When we say bar, you say in Spanish tableta. Yeah, but not tablet in English. Bar of chocolate.
Like bar of soap. Yeah, that was an important date, that 1828, when the chocolate press was invented. That really kind of changed the history of chocolate and made it open to being manufactured by manufacturing companies. So let's look at how chocolate is actually made. So it comes from a tree, the cacao tree, which in Greek is called Theobroma cacao, which interestingly means food for the gods. Loosely translates as food for the gods. Very appropriate, in my opinion. And these cacao trees are native to Central and South America, countries that are in and around the equator. But what's interesting is that these days it's kind of moved to African countries. We'll speak about that later. So a lot of the growing of these cacao trees now happens in Western Africa, not so much in Central and South America.
So Craig has mentioned before the tree, but what about breaking it down into smaller units? Well, each cacao pod, what we call a pod, P-O-D, contains about 30 or 40 beans. Yeah? So there's 30 or 40 beans inside the larger pod. This word pod in English has lots of meanings. It covers many areas, doesn't it? Like space travel. Yeah, iPod, exactly. Space travel, we often talk about, get in the pod, it'd be like a capsule. So something that encapsulates, something that like contains other things is kind of a pod in English. So if you can imagine 30 or 40 beans inside the pod, these beans then are fermented for about a week. Then they're dried, and then they're roasted. Roast is applying heat to something without oil. Yeah, because if you apply heat with oil, you'll be frying something. So without any oil, they're just roasted. So the coffee beans, after they've been fermented, then dried, then roasted, the outer shell, the shell is like the exterior part of something, and outer, not inside, the outer shell is removed, is taken away, and the inner, the opposite of outer, the inner cocoa bean meat, they call it, meat, like carne, is broken into smaller pieces, and that's what we call the cocoa nibs, N-I-B-S.
And you may have seen that word if you eat a lot of chocolate, like I do. If you go to a shop, you may see a bar of chocolate with cocoa nibs inside. So they're very hard, crunchy, not very nice in my opinion, but sometimes they're put inside chocolate as coffee beans, pieces of coffee are sometimes as well, cocoa nibs. So then what happens is the cacao nibs or cocoa nibs pass through a current of air which blows off the outer shell of these nibs, and then the nibs are ground, there's that word again, to grind. They are ground into like a chocolate liqueur, chocolate liquid.
Then this liquid, this chocolate liquid, which comes from that process, that gets mixed with other ingredients. They vary, but typical ingredients tend to be vanilla, and then the actual cocoa butter that we mentioned earlier, and some other things. So we get the chocolate, and it's then passed through rollers, things which roll. They go round in circles, and this gives it a more silky texture. Silky. That's an adjective. Silky, like silk. Silk is that lovely, smooth material, seda. So it gives it that feeling, that silky texture.
The final stage of blending is in a machine called a conching machine, C-O-N-C-H-I-N-G. Not a common word, but very frequent in the process of chocolate making. And what does this conching process do? It kind of mixes and kneads the chocolate and makes it taste less bitter. And that verb to knead is not N-E-E-D, it's K-N-E-A-D, to knead, which is what you do when you make bread. You mix the flour and water together and you knead it together and keep kind of mixing it until it becomes smoother. And there's one final process which is called tempering. And tempering, T-E-M-P-E-R-I-N-G, to temper chocolate, is the crystallization process. So the reason that chocolate is so silky and melts in your mouth and so smooth is because of the way it's crystallized when it changes temperature. So that's a very important process too. The cost of the chocolate, the quality of the chocolate, not only depends on the ingredients that you're mixing it with, but also on the time you allow for this final process to get a silky, smooth, rich chocolate texture.
Craig, I think we could put in the show notes a YouTube clip about the process. That'll probably make it clear for people, will it? Will we put that in the notes?
I found one I really liked, making chocolate cacao tree to chocolate bar, about a guy who actually has a cacao plantation, and he explains the process from tree to chocolate bar. So there's a link in the show notes if you're interested in watching that. It's at inglespodcast.com/353. Before we move on to talk about different types of chocolate that you can buy and eat and taste, there's one more thing I'd like to mention, and that's the problem of child labour in chocolate production, because chocolate production is now a $50 billion a year business. That's billion with a B. There's a huge amount of money in chocolate production, and unfortunately that's led to some use of child labour, forced labour, particularly in West Africa, where a lot of the cacao trees are now grown. Do you know the country that produces the most cacao?
I'm going to guess it's Ghana.
Very close. The Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire. They produce 35% of total world cocoa bean production.
Isn't that fascinating? Because, as we explained earlier, it wasn't originally native to there. It was only native to America. And yet now more is grown there than anywhere else.
Exactly, and it's a big problem. So one thing I try to do when I buy chocolate is to see where it's sourced, and as much as possible to make sure that the company is not using child labour in production and picking of these beans.
Well, that's fairly easy to do these days, isn't it? Because I see that many bars of chocolate these days do have the Fair Trade logo on them. It's quite common, isn't it? If
they have the Fair Trade logo, it's pretty sure that the process is legal and they're not using child labour. Yeah.
Fair Trade would be in Spanish el comercio justo. So that means everybody in the production involved has been fairly treated.
So let's move on to different types of chocolate available. Probably the most popular and common is milk chocolate, which in the EU, in the European Union, milk chocolate must have at least 20% cocoa solids in it. However, in the US, the minimum is 10%. So by law, you can have a lot of extra ingredients, a lot more sugar, and less actual cocoa in US chocolate.
And still call it milk chocolate. That's the thing.
And still call it milk chocolate. Correct.
You can have less than 20% if you want in EU, but then you can't call it milk chocolate. You'll have to call it something else.
That's right. And the milk that they add to the chocolate in the process, it can be powdered milk in powdered form, it can be liquid, or it can be condensed milk. Those three types of milk can be added to milk chocolate. Do you often check the labels when you buy things like chocolate?
Oh, when I buy everything, I'm an obsessive when it comes to reading labels, yeah. For chocolate, the very first thing I read is the cocoa solids. I know it's as simple as that. The more cocoa, the better quality. So it's the first thing I read. Before anything else, how much cocoa solids are there? That's what I read first. If it's, around 20%, not much, I'm probably not going to buy it because I like the taste of cocoa. Same for you?
Yeah, usually, except when when I need a fix of chocolate, I've got a craving, I need the drug, then I just run and buy anything and eat it, yeah. But usually I check what's in it. So apart from milk chocolate, Reza, what other types of chocolate are out there?
Well, you could buy my favourite, which is dark or plain chocolate. Yes, you can say either word, dark or plain. That's Plain. That word plain generally means with nothing added, nothing changed, basic. If you say, I like plain food, so you like food which is basic, doesn't mean it's bad food, but no fancy sauces, not much done to it, just cooked in a simple way. Good, honest food, plain food. So plain chocolate or dark chocolate has less done to it, in a way, you could say. In other words, it has a higher percentage of cocoa, the main ingredient, and therefore it has a stronger cocoa taste. And all the fat content in the chocolate, if it's dark or plain chocolate, is from cocoa butter, not from milk. If it were milk, then it would be milk chocolate. So chocolate with no added sugar at all, which would be at the extreme end of dark or plain chocolate, is unsweetened chocolate. And it's often used for baking. So not all dark chocolate is unsweetened. In fact, most dark chocolate has some sugar in it, right? But generally less than milk chocolate. Most people don't really like eating unsweetened chocolate.
It's very bitter.
Very bitter. It's used mostly for baking. But there are a few people who eat it. Do you like unsweetened chocolate?
No, it's too bitter for me. And for me, it tastes a bit too dry. The taste is very muddy and not sweet enough, yeah.
Yeah, muddy, like mud, yeah? Como barro, yeah? Like mud, yeah. But as we explained right at the beginning of this episode, that would have been the original taste that the Aztecs were familiar with.
Exactly. There's another classification for chocolate which some people might argue is not actually chocolate, but it's called white chocolate. Now, white chocolate contains cocoa butter, but it does not have any cocoa solids. So it's basically cocoa butter, sugar, and milk. Have you ever tasted it? Do you like white chocolate?
I mean, who hasn't tasted white chocolate? It's fairly easily available, but it's a sort of thing that, like most adults, I wouldn't eat it that often. It seems to be more popular with children, doesn't it?
Yeah.
With chocolate. And there's a good reason for that, because if you react to cocoa, because cocoa can have quite a strong effect on your stomach, it's less likely with white chocolate. Cocoa, as far as I know, like coffee, it's very close relation, and it tends to make you go to the toilet.
Yeah, it can act as a laxative.
So white chocolate's going to have a far less laxative effect. So particularly for kids or for people with bowel problems, stomach problems, possibly white chocolate's the best choice for them. But I think that white chocolate nearly always has a lot more sugar than milk or dark chocolate. Would you say so?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. So speaking about these different percentages of cocoa solids in chocolate, I want to have a blind tasting with Reza to see how his palate is, his taste for chocolate, and see if he can fairly accurately guess the percentage of cocoa solids in 4 different examples of chocolate. Reza, are you ready for this challenge?
I'm ready, Craig, but before you better explain what a blind tasting means.
Yeah, blind y ciego. So I'm going to ask Reza to close his eyes. And without looking at the chocolate, he holds out his hand. He's sitting here next to me, but obviously socially distanced because we're recording this during the pandemic. So he's sitting on the other side of the table. He's going to hold out his hand. I will place a piece of chocolate in his hand. He will taste it and hopefully tell me more or less the percentage of cocoa in the chocolate.
Should I remove my face mask or try to force the chocolate through the mask?
I think it would be easier if you lifted your face mask, put the chocolate in, and then pulled the face mask down.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to have my nice blue face mask all smeared in brown chocolate.
No, your partner might wonder what you've been doing. Are you ready for the first tasting?
I'm always ready for chocolate, Craig.
Okay, here's your first piece of chocolate now.
Okay, I'm holding in my hand, with my eyes closed, the first little piece of chocolate. Here we go, into the mouth. That's nice, very nice.
What do you think? What's the percentage of cocoa solids in that?
Oh, can I say, it has some quite acidic notes in there.
Does it have fruitiness? Are you getting earth? Yeah. Are you getting fruity flavour? Are you getting strawberries? What are you getting, Reza?
I'm not joking. I really can taste the fruitiness there. It's not very extreme on the dark side, but I would say, I'm guessing that that's about 60% cocoa.
You're fairly close. It's 75.
Oh, right.
75. So a bit higher than you originally thought.
Right.
Okay, take a sip of water and I'll give you number 2.
To clean my palate, we say, when you're between tasting different things and you don't want the flavours to mix. So here goes some water. Here goes the second one.
I notice you're crunching, not sucking.
Should I suck to get a bit like wine tasting, yeah?
Well, it's up to you. It's your mouth.
This one has less cocoa than the previous one.
Correct.
Well, you said the previous one was 72%?
75.
So this one's going to be somewhere then in the lineup. I thought the first one was 60%. I was a bit on the low side. So this one I'm eating now is about 60% then.
Very, very close. 66. Fantastic.
Here we go. Here's the next one. Very different texture.
And how would you describe the texture?
This one is softer, smoother.
So you'd say more cocoa butter?
I think it has more cocoa butter, but it doesn't have more cocoa as a percentage. In fact, it has less, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, for me, this is verging on being white chocolate. It's pretty low.
Would you give it a percentage, or are you going with white chocolate, which obviously has 0%?
But I'm tempted to say it's white chocolate.
You're right. 100% white chocolate, so 0% cocoa solids. Well done. That's incredible. Okay, another sip of water, and here's your last piece of chocolate.
Yeah, much harder. The texture, much harder.
Yeah.
This one is definitely the most bitter. That doesn't necessarily mean it has the highest percentage of cocoa, but it definitely has the lowest percentage of sugar, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
This one, am I right about that?
Yep. What percentage do you think of cocoa solids?
I would say it's high, but this one is stronger, I reckon. Could this one be about 80%, 82?
Much stronger. It's actually 92% cocoa solids, so it's nearly pure. 92%. But yeah, you were pretty accurate, and it is difficult when you're tasting one after the other to get the taste of the previous chocolate out of your mouth. I've got a recommendation for you if you're interested in cooking with chocolate, especially baking with chocolate cakes and cookies and biscuits, things like that. Alice Medrich is well recommended for her recipes, her cookbooks. There's a link in the show notes to her website, alicemedrich.com. That's ALICEMEDRICH. All of her recipes, according to my wife, are absolutely fantastic, and they always work. The secret, of course, is to use good quality chocolate. There are many, many different companies that make very, very good chocolate. They don't tend to be the big multinational conglomerates. They tend to be the smaller independent companies, and there are three I'll recommend, and you can see these names in the show notes at inglespodcast.com/353. One I really like from France is Valrhona chocolate, VALRHONA. That's very good quality. Another chocolate bar that have many different percentages and from many different plantations and countries is Michel Cluizel, which is also French. And if you're in a Latin American country, you might find it easier to get some chocolate from Scharfenberger, which is based in the US. So those two French recommendations if you're in Europe, and Scharfenberger is very good quality chocolate for baking in the US. What do you like to mix your chocolate with? What food goes well with chocolate?
Well, I know some people like mixing chocolate with savoury things. Savoury, SAVOURY. That means things which are not sweet. But for me, it doesn't work with many things that aren't sweet, to be honest. I mix it with other sweet things or with some fruit. For example, coconut and chocolate, you can't go wrong. Coconut mixed with chocolate is a very good combination.
I don't like that. I don't like that combination. But you like coconut very much.
I really love coconut, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not very keen on coconut. But I agree, fruit. I mean, I love chocolate with orange. Oranges go well with chocolate. Raspberries, black currants, blackberries. Banana goes well with chocolate.
Yeah.
And dulce de leche.
Of course, dulce de leche.
As you can guess, I've got a very sweet tooth. Someone who likes sweet things, in English, we say they have a sweet tooth.
What about drinking chocolate, Craig? Solid or drinking chocolate? Which tickles your fancy more?
What does tickle your fancy mean?
Tickle your fancy is a colloquial way of saying you like it more, or it affects you more in a pleasant way.
I like hot chocolate in the winter. Of course, it never gets really cold in Spain, but on those rainy, cold winter evenings, lovely hot chocolate. I make it with cocoa powder that is unsweetened, the pure stuff, and then I add some sugar to taste. But in rest of the year, just normal chocolate. But I don't like mixing chocolate with other food. I prefer it pure by itself.
Not even churros?
I'll eat churros and chocolate if you twist my arm, if you force me.
You're not a big fan of churros con chocolate?
If the chocolate is good, if it's good chocolate, yes. Valor is a Spanish brand that makes very good hot chocolate with churros. It's very thick. Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah.
Another company I really like is Trapa.
I haven't
Spanish
heard of
company.
that.
Trapa from Zaragoza. They're good as well. They're good. Trapa and Valor and then Tiu Shishona would be the three Spanish companies I'd really go for.
Well, what's your favourite chocolate? What chocolate do you enjoy? We'd love to hear from you and your opinions on chocolate and what you like and dislike. You can send us a voice message by going to speakpipe.com. That's speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. Reza, how about emails?
If you want to write to us, you can write to either of us. You can get me at belfastreza@gmail.com or write to Craig. He's at craig@inglespodcast.com.
And apart from the pronunciation course that I mentioned earlier, there are other courses for sale on mencioningles.net. So go to store.mencioningles.net.
As always, we'd like to thank all of you who are helping us by supporting this podcast through Patreon. That's Patreon. If you're interested, go to patreon.com/Inglespodcast and you could, like our sponsors, perhaps sign up and generously donate a little bit of money to us. I think the minimum is about $1.21 at the minute, because that 21 is for tax, for VAT. So for as little as that, you'll get instant access to recent transcriptions. We'd like to thank every single person by name, but we can't. There isn't enough time. But what we always do is thank the most recent sponsors who've just recently joined the list. Who are our most recent sponsors, Craig?
Our more recent sponsors are Michael Slasky, Javier Alberto, Cristina Morente, Maria Teresa Garcia, or Maite, and Rafael. Thank you to those recent subscribers, and of course everyone who's supporting us on the Patreon scheme. What's next week, Reza?
Next week, the thing which we will be talking about is defining and non-defining relative clauses.
I noticed you just used one there. Yeah, last week we weren't sure if we had spoken about this before. I checked all our episodes and I could not find any episode that spoke about those different clauses, so we'll cover those next week. Thank you for listening this week. Until next time, it's goodbye from Reza.
And bye-bye for Craig.
We're going to go and have some more chocolate. See you soon. The music in this podcast is by Pits. The track is called See You Later.
This is true, as Craig's about to find out, because I'm going to do a blind tasting on him. Your turn. Ready to go?
You want to do it?
Yep. With different chocolate, mate.
Oh, with different chocolate.
We live in your good house, yeah.
Well, I didn't expect this. You're going to give me tasting now?
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't prepare this in advance. Craig did, but since I happen to have a couple of bars of chocolate, I thought, let me get my revenge. Here we go. Number one.
Okay, it's going into my mouth now. It's unusual for me to have any chocolate in the house because I eat it too quickly.
What do you think?
It's a very smooth texture, and there's a fair amount of cocoa solids in there, so I'm going to go for between 60 and 70%.
You're not far off. It's 72%.
72%, okay. Yeah, that's nice chocolate.
Here comes number two.
This one has a much higher percentage of cocoa. It's very muddy, earthy flavour. So I'm going to go for 85%.
You are spot on, Craig. It is exactly 85%. So I've told him that the first one's Hacendado. What do you think the second one is? Hacendado is Mercadona. And the second one is also Hacendado.
Also Hacendado.
So Hacendado, Mercadona, can make some fairly decent chocolate if you get a high cocoa percentage. But of course they don't make it. If you read the label, as I said earlier, I obsessively do. Thank goodness Hacendado don't make this chocolate themselves.
Who makes it?
Antiguo Shoshona, which is a company I really like. Shoshona, or if you prefer, Gijona, which is also, of course, the only place in Spain, or certainly the center for making turrón. All turrón comes from Alicante, Gijona in Alicante, and they also make chocolate down there. So at least I'm supporting local business. So that's Alicante chocolate.